Hello, my name is Eugene Davidovich, the San Diego Chapter Coordinator of Americans for Safe Access. This news brief will be a little bit longer than most because the issue discussed here today is critically important to every single medical marijuana patient in San Diego and anyone that cares about this issue. The proposed ordinance that would regulate medical marijuana dispensaries in the city of San Diego is now one step closer to a full council vote. On Thursday, January 20th, the San Diego Planning Commission voted to approve the recommendations to further restrict access to medical marijuana for patients in the city of San Diego. By a vote of 3-2, the commission recommended that the city council add colleges and universities to the list of sensitive uses, and that the conditional use permit would be a process for. The discussion and vote took over 4 hours on Thursday and included testimony from well over 24 concerned citizens, patients, doctors, lawyers, law enforcement, and land use experts, all of whom were pleading with the Planning Commission to adopt less restrictive regulations and make recommendations that has the patient's interest in mind and not the bias-driven agenda of a select few in our community. Now let's take a closer look at some of the testimony from that day.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, my name is Leo Lawrence. I'm a former deputy sheriff, served in the DA's office, hold a law degree. Medical marijuana has been state law for 14 years, and we're still trying to implement it. Medical marijuana dispensaries are legal. They are not evil. They do not create crime problems. I'm in law enforcement. A lot of people will try to get emotional and say, oh, this is terrible. They're going after the youth and such. Wrong. Indeed, medical marijuana dispensaries are not only legal, but they revitalize communities and provide businesses nearby with more business. If you create regulations that make it so difficult or impossible to reasonably have dispensaries, you're inviting so many lawsuits that the city doesn't need. There are so many substantive challenges to the proposed ordinance that's before you that I can't list them all.
What we see here in San Diego is a very small, fragmented segment of our community of the prohibitionists coming out here to speak to you. As you can see by the members in this room, we have many folks that are here for a regulation, for an ordinance. And as you see in a very, very small little group over there in the back, we have Mr. Scott Chipman and a few others who are here to scare you that marijuana is evil, that marijuana is not a medicine. Folks, this is a land use issue, a healthcare one at that. We should focus on that and not on the bias and the hate and the propaganda that has been fed to you folks. We need to create reasonable, safe regulations.
I believe that the proposed ordinance before you today does not reflect any previous motions and is far more restrictive than the Land Use and Housing Subcommittee's and Chairman Todd Gloria's recommendations. Dispensaries are allowed in yellow zones. There's 1, 2-ish. All the red are 1,000 feet buffers around the sensitive uses. That's what the ordinance would look like if it were enacted today. So all these anti-people would be very happy. In the rest of the packet, which is just for the public record, we suggest that the commissioners consider other options such as population by zip code, caps per zip code, something like that, that allows more than 1 or 2 in the entire city. Thank you.
And it is my job to advocate, advise, and represent my clients, some of whom are directors of collectives and dispensaries. Unfortunately, with the current ordinance as it's written, my advice to my clients would have to be to exhaust your administrative remedies, and then when those are rubber stamped, as they usually are, sue the city. That is not something I would like to do. That is not something I feel is in the best interest of the city of San Diego or any other for any of its members, especially City Council.
If crime was such an issue, the police would be here with specific numbers and specific increases for neighborhoods. If you do a search on the Automated Regional Justice Information System, we'll see there's not a noticeable increase around most dispensaries. Right now, we do have hundreds of unregulated dispensaries. We are the test case. If there were going to be problems, they would have already happened. There's not much bad going on.
My message is simple: enact reasonable regulation and enact it now. We've been talking about this for a year and a half. While we continue to talk, people get more and more discouraged about the political process. There also becomes the opportunity for litigation. As a tax-paying member of the community, I'm hopeful that we can avoid needless litigation by enacting reasonable regulation.
Union Tribune, Sunday, you guys may have seen, lowest murder rate of all time. I'm Tiffany Childegard, Flying Paint Ranch, Campo, the only medical marijuana horse ranch available in the United States. I've been listening to the constant comments that crime and medical marijuana storefronts go hand in hand. I have a thing here that I'd like to have lit up, please. San Diego Police Chief William Lansdowne, who generally supports medical marijuana, has been documented saying that dispensaries have become magnets for crime, for such as burglaries and robberies. I, Tiffany Childegard, have decided to check San Diego police statistics to see if the comments that the public has relied on from Chief Lansdowne were accurate, precise, and truthful. In black and white and presented here, they are just the opposite. There was less crime, and without safe access, there was more crime. I don't know where everybody here says that there's more crime. I've not seen anybody bring a single, this is it, this is on the website, this is what the San Diego Police is saying is the current right now. It has not increased. I have 3 seconds left. I want to thank you very much for your time and hearing me out.
I've been told by the PD that crime rate has went down around my collective and the surrounding areas because we watch out for stuff and we constantly call things in, and so the whole thing about crime going up is a big load. We work with the police department in that area on a daily basis. They all know me by name, and so we are an asset to the community. I have houses not too far behind my shop, and those people in those houses appreciate us because we are active in the community. We are an asset to the community. We bring people into the stores there. We are good to the residents around us. My patients, many of them handicapped, do not have cars. If you enact this ruling that you're talking about and people can't get to it, there's no way for them to get to it.
I know that in your first thought is going to be to not want to do anything that I'm about to ask you. And that is because I'm from Imperial Beach. I don't have anything to do with San Diego, so they say. However, I do. Imperial Beach on Wednesday has cited San Diego as one of the two reasons that they are going to ban medical marijuana in the city. The reason one is already been completely squashed by Ms. Kildegard, and thank you very much for that. And what you didn't really hear her say is crime has gone all the way down in San Diego until 2006 when Bonnie Dominguez raided all the locations and shut them all down. For 2006, 7, and 8, crime went up. In 2009, President Obama got on this, at that time, candidate Obama got on the grandstand saying that he was going to recognize medical marijuana laws and that he was going to back off of the Bush-era raid, tactical-style raids. So when that happened, Safe Access came back to San Diego, and according to her numbers, which are coming from your website, crime went back down on 2009 and 2010. Now, moving forward, Imperial Beach's second reason is saying that, well, because Safe Access exists in San Diego, we don't have to do anything. Our patients are going to be fine. They can just go to San Diego. But last I heard, every dispensary operator I was speaking to is waiting in every single day in the mail from a letter from this office saying that they must shut down. So there is no Safe Access in the entire county. And it's coming to you to give them safe access. All the other 18 municipalities around San Diego City, the main municipality, are looking towards you for guidance. If you guide them towards a more restrictive ordinance that puts their patients even further out to get it. And what it all comes down to is the patients that have come up to you. The reason I'm here is not because I'm a patient. It's because I know of patients that can't get out of bed to come here. And that's why I'm here. Because those patients can't drive. Let me also say that those patients don't have any money, and you've been brought that. And these are people you're supposed to serve. These patients have caregivers that are broke. Caregivers don't get paid very much money. In fact, when I was a caregiver, I gave everything I had to be one. In order to do a caregiver's job, you don't have a car, you got a bus pass. I am. The bus pass. I said the bus pass. Make sure there's a bus route at every location.
What we really need here in San Diego are reasonable ordinances such as were developed carefully by the Medical Marijuana Task Force. I urge you strongly to simply adopt those. I'm not a threat to my community. I really like the last fellow that spoke. I think I try to be an asset.
My name is Vay Linville. I live in Spring Valley. I drink cannabis medicines to breathe. They keep me from suffocating. The ordinance before you is overly restrictive. Virtually everyone who's commented on it in any kind of balanced way, the CMT, the CPC, the Medical Marijuana Task Force, have all made recommendations that are considerably less restrictive. Please recommend a less restrictive interpretation, and maybe we could all compromise on 600 feet, matching the governor's new law. It would be reasonable.
Thank you.
What we need to do is we need to make sure that we have safe access here in the city. We need to make sure it's in the places where people are. Because if you've gone through chemotherapy or if you have issues like that, you don't want to go and try and drive out 25 miles to go get your medicine. And this is not a recreational thing. This is for sick people. That's what we're talking about. So we need to make sure the medicine is where the people are at.
So my request today is that you don't enact an ordinance and that what you do today is create a use. That's it. You don't need to send this to Planning Commission. The buck stops here. I'm asking you to do something today, right now. Don't make a move on this ordinance. Why? Why can't you find where medical marijuana fits into this category? Why are NCCD and the city attorney issuing NOVs and cease and desist letters? Why do we have to go to city council? Why can't you all do your job?
I have many friends and family that are affected by the HIV/AIDS virus. It's an epidemic in our community as well as across the globe. And luckily here in the United States, we've pioneered techniques and medicines that allow people to maintain a reasonable standard of living and live with the virus. One of the medications that's really essential to maintaining a quality standard of living amongst people afflicted with HIV in the gay community and otherwise is cannabis. As is well known and reported, it's one of the only medications that allows people to maintain a healthy appetite and a healthy weight. And here in the United States, we have seen people live decades beyond what was originally forecast with the virus. And it's my contention that the restrictive measures that have been placed in this particular initiative are not only dangerous to the community, but would severely affect the quality of life that the LGBT community enjoys, especially people afflicted by this virus, as well as many other illnesses that people use cannabis for. And I fear that the most vulnerable members of our community are going to be the ones that suffer the most. The prospect of somebody infected with HIV or AIDS being asked to take a bus to a train to a location in an industrial park to purchase medication which is necessary to maintain their quality of life, I think is unreasonable and puts an undue burden on the gay community as well as people that suffer with a variety of other ailments. So, Commissioners, I urge you to think before you vote. The human element, the people that are personally affected, this is not just a piece of legislation. This is something that affects families, it affects people. And, you know, we exist to educate the public about what people like you guys do, the decisions you make, the legislations that affect people. And so the community is watching, we're watching, and I really hope you guys make the right decision. And we do not support the legislation as written.
But what we see borne out in this suggested ordinance is the hopes and dreams of the prohibitionists without respect to what the voters of California wanted. We saw that the voters of California want people whose doctor recommends that they use cannabis. The voters of California want them to be able to get it. And the ordinance as proposed, I would contend, serves as a de facto ban on safe access for patients. You saw from the map, the areas left open for access are very few and very restrained. And it saddens me to see this group of prohibitionists flaunt the democratic system and not even be compelled by sympathy for the sick and the suffering, and instead argue for more prohibition, more drastic prohibition, more restriction. They hardly hid their intentions of, we don't even want any dispensaries, but if we're going to have some, let's make sure they're really hard to get to and really far away. So I urge this body to adopt more of the recommendations from the Medical Marijuana Task Force and the other bodies who have put forth common sense ordinances to reject this one as a de facto ban. And it's my greatest hope at this moment that you guys do the right thing and bring the right recommendation to the City Council. Thank you very much.
I was one of the 11 members of the Medical Marijuana Task Force. I was the so-called land use planner on that particular task force. I've never used marijuana either recreationally or medicinally, but frankly, after having sat on this task force, I'm a really strong believer in providing reasonable, regulated opportunities for these cooperatives. As the map that was shown, as it was cut down by the City Council Land Use and Housing, I really don't think is reasonable. The task force recommended all industrial and all commercial. As a minority on that committee, I suggested all commercial with the exception of neighborhood commercial and visitor commercial. And then also the task force recommended a process 2 and 3. I felt that it was really just better to go with a process 3 that would allow the smaller dispensaries or collectives to grow. So I would increase the areas in which this could be located, and I would have this done as a process 3. Thank you.
This is way too restrictive, and it is in fact a de facto ban. I've gone personally to look at different places you could go to that were in proposed areas. And not only that, there's 2 or 3 families that own the property, and they ain't about to let that happen.
And I'm a medical marijuana user. To give you a little history, I had major back surgery a couple of years ago. I was on very strong pain medication, and I got addicted and OD'd, and fortunately I'm standing here today. So I cannot take any pain prescription medicine anymore. I found that marijuana was the one medicine that has helped me through my pain. And I'm also at the point where driving any long distance for me is very difficult. And so if I couldn't find a collective within a couple of miles of my home, I don't know how I would get it.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm the owner of a professional medical office building at 4015 Park Boulevard. We have 4 medical marijuana dispensaries. For the last 17 years, we've been dispensing medications. For the first 15 years with Sharp Mesa Vista Psychiatric Hospital. In the last 2 years, we've had medical marijuana dispensaries. There's no increased criminal activity. There's no evidence of any kind of criminal activity around our building for the last 2 years. Number 1. Number 2 is that when I bought the building 11 years ago, we were dispensing medications, and I was getting approximately $100,000 income from Sharp. At this time, I'm getting $100,000 income from the medical marijuana dispensaries. I don't feel I should lose any income because of any kind of planning change.
What an amazing job the San Diego medical marijuana community did that day, representing and lobbying for less restrictive regulations. So many people took the time out of their busy lives to come out and discuss this issue and testify about it to the Planning Commission. After hearing all of this convincing evidence from the San Diego community, the Commission decided to engage in a discussion about the issue. Now let's take a look exactly what it is that this discussion included.
I think I heard from those who, well, it's difficult for me to sort through. Some people were quite clear about their in favor or opposed to it, and there were some nuanced positions between all that, of course. And I think what I heard from a number of people who were in favor of the ordinance was a sense that there was groups that said that the ordinance didn't go far enough in terms of protecting neighborhoods or protecting sensitive receptor uses. There were those who were in support of the ordinance as written. There were various supports for a variety of other interpretations from the code monitoring team, the CPC, or other sources. I also heard from people who were opposed to the project. The primary the primary theme that I heard out of those opposed to this was the notion that an overly restrictive access creates issues and hardships for people who need the medicine. Is that a fair summation? So I think that really what we have to kind of sort through here is whether or not, from a land use perspective, is the ordinance doing what's necessary to implement California law? Is it doing so in a way that's fair and equitable? And is it doing so in a way that is providing fair access while protecting needs that may have some legitimate concerns about proximity? So that's how I understand the issue of the discussion. Commissioner Lydon?
And I'm just curious, if a pharmacy was going to move into a building, what kind of process would they have to go through?
Dan Joyce. Depending on the base zone, a pharmacy could go in by right. Certain base zones, certain commercial base zones would allow a pharmacy to go in without any permit other than a building permit.
Am I correct in presuming that any enforcement of the ordinance would be through the code enforcement organization? Is that the plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Hill, I'm not sure if this goes to you or city staff. Or right now, there was testimony that currently you can't legally be open in the city of San Diego for a collective, correct?
That's correct.
So what is the intent of the city staff as far as, if this passes today, there's no sort of grandfather period, or will code enforcement continue to seek closure of those in the interim, even if they're applying for a permit, or how is that all set up or anticipated to work when this finally does pass city council?
The Land Use and Housing Committee was explicitly clear that there would be no grandfather clause, so there's no grandfather clause built in.
And so then and I don't know if this goes to your city attorney's office or what, but are we currently, as the city, actively trying to close all of these through the woman who gave the testimony of the notice of violations, or what, or how do they happen, those that are sort of out there in the fog right now?
The actions that are going forward as neighborhood code violations are done by our criminal division, and there's a wall between where I work, the civil division, and the criminal division. It is my understanding that notices of violation have been issued for a variety of different types of offenses. It would be within the neighborhood code department's purview and the prosecutor's purview as to which cases they felt were worthy of pursuing.
And assuming that an ordinance passes and whichever institution it is that this address is currently operating in the eyes of the city illegally, but the ordinance passes and, a month later, once they've done all the paperwork, they submit for a permit, could that bear into the code enforcement action then, that they're at least in a pipeline trying to become legalized? Or
I can't say whether it would or not, but I know that you commonly see people in code violation situations coming before you to remedy that through getting a permit.
Okay, so at least that would give an open collective a chance to say, I'm on the process, I'm trying to do it a certain amount of time or something, that to become legalized then. Was it ever given any serious consideration to allow I think Mr. LaCava called it a process for light, or, in this case, obviously a 3 or a 2 that would allow either a smaller institution or one that, met all the criteria, a streamlined path to get in?
The intention of the committee was to have the city council have a role in the decision-making process. So that was the reason they went with process 4.
And so that would mean that their intent was, by starting at 4, it's appealable to city council as opposed to a 3, which kind of comes to us, but then it can only be, I believe, appealed on environmental terms, correct?
Correct.
So that would then, they willingly and knowingly asked for it to be able to come to them? And they were aware of this decision, right?
They were.
I have no conflicting evidence that suggests otherwise, but in that testimony that that Commissioner Golba was talking about is the size and the number of applicable parcels that this applies to, depending on which version of the ordinance is accepted. And in its current City Attorney Office's draft proposal, the public testimony suggested 31 parcels in the entire city. Now, I don't have a way of knowing if that's accurate, well researched, whatever. It was presented with some level of convincing authority. However, I don't have a secondary resource to tell me otherwise. But I can tell you that makes me very concerned. 31 parcels in the entire city is beyond restrictive. So I got to say that one, that, I don't know where we're going to go with this, but if that is in fact true, that does not even begin to meet the minimum standard of care about how to put this out there. I need to kind of understand. I would think the city council, before they make a final decision here, needs to take what's in this presentation and back check it, because if this is for real, this is a problem.
Chairman Eslin, I thought that was clarified, that there was a transposition of those IL parcel numbers, and so that's why I think Commissioner Goba mentioned 191
Could you come up? I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. Say it again.
Kate Valentine.
Kate Valentine. Okay. So you made a point about the transposition of numbers in the zone. So
Yes.
if that were corrected, would the 31 parcels still be correct?
No, it would be 97 parcels.
97 parcels. Okay, so 97 still seems overly restricted to me, but that's just my opinion.
I've heard a lot of testimony back and forth. I have some personal experiences with the advent of the unregulated medical marijuana, being in the real estate management business. There's statistics here that talk about crime in my neighborhood, but doesn't include the armed robbery of the collective that was in my building. So I think that that's maybe understated. So I'm not really in favor of unregulated facilities. We can pass this off to the City Council with the proposed following motion. I'd like the motion to include colleges and universities, though, in the 1,000-foot distance separation. I do think that's an important element, and I think the college communities have spoken pretty clearly on that. And it was also a fairly close vote. So I'm going to propose that we recommend the City Council approve the proposed amendments, and that they also include colleges and universities in that 1,000-foot distance separation. There may be other potentially friendly amendments that other people want to raise, but that's my start.
I'll second it.
Okay, so motion by Commissioner Griswold, a second by Commissioner Smiley. And just to be clear, what the motion is about is the staff recommendation with the addition of the additional buffer from colleges to universities in your motion. Is that correct? Okay. Discussion on that motion? Commissioner Leiden first.
I'd also like to propose that we make this a process 3, because I think process 4 is too prohibitive. I'd also like us to consider that we need to find more allowable land uses. There's just too few. And then thirdly, I believe there needs to be a grace period for the existing dispensaries to become compliant.
Okay. The first one was the process 3 instead of process 4.
I'd like to try it without. I'm willing to consider that, but I think I want to try the motion without that.
Okay. All right. So what about the more allowable land or zones for it to be applicable in?
I'm opposed to that.
Okay. How about the grace period?
That's a difficult one. I think no grace period is maybe unreasonable, but I'd like a short period of time. I think with somebody proposed a year, I think that's too long. I would be willing to consider 6 months.
What about the seconder of that motion?
I could agree with that.
Okay, so of the friendly amendments offered, the only one accepted by the maker of the motion and the seconder was the grace period of 6 months. So still the motion is process 4 at this moment.
If possible, I'd like the motion to occur something that between now and the time it gets to City Council is that staff has a chance to analyze basically the number of parcels that qualify, because I think of everything we've seen today, this map that Ms. Valentine did is potentially the most damning, especially if you took it, obviously the typo is not correct, that's not the intent, but even at 97 parcels, that's pretty restrictive. You assume half of those are either not available, landlords wouldn't consider even renting to it. Now we're down to basically 50 sites in the whole city that would be applicable. That's probably overly restrictive in anybody's eyes. So I would like to think that, maybe you can exchange data or do your own research, but if this proceeds forward as written as a recommendation, it would be nice for council to know exactly how many parcels it applies to, because I think that's a huge piece of information to make a decision on. Again, we're just recommending, but when you look at those potential numbers citywide, that's pretty amazing.
I would agree with that. I think that, particularly with the amendments that we've discussed here, I really have no way of analyzing or knowing what are we talking about in terms of what's left. And we've sort of cordoned off all the areas we can't do this. And the other thing I'd point out about the alcohol piece is that the 600 feet really is the threshold by which you initiate a conditional use permit, not that there's an outright restriction at 600 feet. So that's a little different than an outright restriction. So that's something that also has me a little bit concerned about. So I agree that whatever we go forward with, I think there's some more thorough analysis between what various proposals are and what that ultimately means about what's available out there to do this. I think without that information, I don't know how anybody can make a rational and reasonable decision. And I think our decision makers deserve that kind of information at the very least. So, I mean, presently I can't support the motion right now based on that, but I don't know where it all stands. I think here's the things that I take away from this experience or from this testimony is that there are indeed places where in this city where dispensaries probably should be buffered against other kinds of sensitive receptors. I think there are, in fact, that the dispensaries need to be regulated in some fashion, the same way we regulate just about every other land use in this city. So those things have to happen, at the very least. And I think in conformance with state law, which is in conflict with federal law about this material in general, we have to be sort of extra careful about that piece of it in my mind. So I do believe there are receptors. Whether or not residential neighborhoods, what's the appropriate distance, I think that's probably an acceptable sensitive receptor. But I'd want to make absolutely certain that that it wasn't so overly restrictive as to essentially become an outright ban. And I think that that's where the present ordinance is heading. And frankly, the voters of California have had their say about this. The state law has a particular attitude about it, whether you agree or don't agree with that vote or that way that law is in place. It is presently the law of the state of California. And I think it's up to us. And we have testimony from people here who rely on this, and I am convinced by that testimony that I think it's incumbent upon us to provide humane and safe treatment where possible, with trying to balance this against these issues about sensitive receptors and how that influences or impacts those things. So it's a very difficult balance. I don't envy the city council on this piece, frankly, but that's why they ran for the spot and raised all that money to do it. So I'm going to let them do it. But frankly, this motion is presently constructed. I really feel strongly that we need to have places where this can be put in a well-regulated fashion, and I don't feel that there's enough of it now in this present motion. Are there comments, or should we vote on where we stand? Okay, we're ready to vote then? Okay, so that motion is 3 in favor, 2 opposed. So the recommendation of the City Council will be as the motion was stated, with all the dialogue and recommendations that came with it. And so that's it for that item, and I guess I'll return all of you over to the City Council hearing when it's docketed to take your case to that one.
A sad day for San Diego citizens. On Thursday, against the protests of dozens of people, as well as the chair of the Planning Commission, 3 bias-driven individuals were able to advance their prohibitionist agenda against the wishes, against the testimony, and against the pleadings of dozens of people in the community. Let's hope that the San Diego City Council will see through the hate of a few and vote in the interest of many in our community. As one of the speakers from the community said that day, council members, think before you vote.